Men who are single after 35 are single because they are protecting patriarchy. They are still protecting the very system that harms women. Women are single because they are rejecting patriarchy. They're not the same. Women want independence, sovereignty, and partners who serve and respect them. Men still want control and blind obedience. They expect women to serve, to obey, to perform labor, to follow conditions. It's not that difficult for the average man to find an average good woman, because average women are kind, hardworking, empathetic, and capable of supporting herself. The average man is manipulative, aggressive, capable of abuse, capable of doing things most people cannot even imagine. Look at the Giselle case, the French lady where her husband was giving her sleeping pills and would allow, some strangers online to, abuse her. They said it was 50 or 100 men were coming to abuse, and this woman was uncautious. It was her own husband, her loving husband. He was allowing hundreds of men to do things to her while she's drugged, uncautious. The average woman, cannot easily find a good man. This is the reality, because the average man can be a predator. The average man is just a Jeffrey Epstein. It could be any man around you. Western women are still oppressed. That's what a lot of people don't want to acknowledge. They think that women in the Western world are, living perfect life, away from oppression. But that's not true. Yes, we have rights, freedom to work, freedom to earn money, freedom to express ourselves. But the oppression hasn't disappeared. It has evolved. Men have found new ways to control, manipulate, and attack us. Especially in the dating world, technology has made it easier for predators. Hidden cameras, online hiring, digital tools like online stuff like doxing. They can reach women in ways our grandmothers couldn't even imagine. We live in a dangerous world. How do men oppress women today in dating? The default used to be a restaurant. You go on a date, you sit, you eat, you connect. Then men degraded into coffee dates. Now in 2026, most men are only offering park dates. They don't even want to buy coffee anymore. And if they invite you for dinner, you have to question it, because he's trying to put you in a position where you have to negotiate your body. He would say that I just paid for this, I treat you well. What am I getting out of this? He's gonna guilt you and shame you into receiving something naturally that he offered. He would guilt trip you so that you submit and say, you know what, you're right, here's my body. He's grooming you. Also, if you want a proper dinner, they call you a gold digger. If you sleep with them on the first date, you're a prostitute. They're grooming everyday women into roles they didn't ask for, turning women into something they're not, just to control them. So men refuse to serve freely. Everything comes with a condition. If you want protection, there's a condition, you have to pay with your body. Protection is like only if you obey. They don't want to provide or respect without expecting something back. They're acting as if women have no contribution to this planet, as if we're not the reason you're here. You exist because of our labor, right? Dish and dash is common. It's common now. You go on a date and he leaves you there to pay for everything. You abandon. He would say, "I will go to the bathroom and disappear on you," and then the waiter will come to you and say, "Hey, your date has run away, so can you please pay the bill?" You abandoned. He abandoned you. And then that's normal behavior now. They're jealous of your value. They hate your independence. They hate that you have natural power. They don't. They control through manipulation, restriction, and intimidation. You see, if a man can't serve you, he can't serve your children. If he can't respect women, he can't respect life. The most humble, amazing thing a man can ever do is serve a woman. Men today are conditioned not to do that. They expect conditions, control, and obedience instead. This is why Western women are single and fleeing the dating market. Every day the patriarchy invents new ways to oppress us. Even with rights and freedoms, we are still under threat. Men are not your allies. They are trained to manipulate, oppress, and exploit. Do not live with men. Do not give them access to your home. Do not risk your safety for romance, okay? Romance is a love spell, okay? It's not real. Technology and manipulation make it easier than ever for a man to exploit, abuse, and control you. Women are evolving, gaining independence, claiming sovereignty, but men are still predators, still oppressors, still dangerous. Dating in the Western world is not a fairy tale. The average man is a threat. The average man is manipulative. The average man is abusive. The average man is like Jeffrey Epstein. You don't know who he could be, but the risk is real. Protect your life, your safety, your autonomy, your children, and your bloodline. Western women have evolved, but patriarchy has evolved faster. The rules have changed. The oppression has changed. The danger has intensified. You must see it. You must acknowledge it. You must protect yourself. And we need new laws.
Patriarchy is not just about men having more status or power than women. It is an ideology, which means that anybody can buy into it. And indeed, we have. Originally called patriarchy because it was rule by the father, this ideology has spread throughout the world, and it still exists in our main institutions today. At the center of this ideology is fear. And the goals of it are saying that it's important to dominate and control others. It says that the world is scarce, and so that we need to compete with each other in order to get scarce commodities. Seeing domination and control as the most important aim means that it needs to back this stuff up with threats of violence if people do not comply. So at a macro level, this can be one country invading another country. And at a micro level, this can be domestic abuse perpetrated on one partner towards another. All of this ideology is, as I said, rooted in fear. And at the very heart of it is a deep insecurity. Because why would you need to dominate and control something unless you felt out of control yourself?
Patriarchy exists to rig natural evolution such that the weakest and cruelest men can still pass on their genetic characteristics. And I have a lot to say about this, so bear with me because I brought notes. And again, this is a well-supported theory in evolutionary science. So we know that in nature, female selection, especially in social mammal groups, drives the evolution of the species. Females are the gatekeepers of reproduction, and this is true in humans as well when you remove the existence of patriarchy. Females select for mates based on health, stability, access to resources, and social standing. And this filters out unfit males and encourages the evolution of the species towards strength, cooperation, and stability. So patriarchy evolved as a workaround. It emerged when men could no longer guarantee that they could pass on their genes. So they created a system to remove choice from the females. Instead of becoming better potential partners, they created institutions to force access to reproduction. Patriarchy is the furthest thing from natural. Then religion and law codified this system. So think virginity, purity, culture, and marriage. This strips away female autonomy. Then religious doctrine makes this obedience holy, and it makes female pleasure sinful. And then legal systems were created to punish adultery, criminalize it, and punish women who are raped and then trap them in marriage. Because think about who really benefits from a system that operates like this. It's only the males who are emotionally unavailable, who are violent, who are narcissistic, who are entitled and insecure, who would not survive the natural selection process. So instead of adapting, these men just weaponized control. Patriarchy limits human flourishing. It literally dooms our species. When women can't choose their partners freely, and by freely I mean free of a patriarchal system in which we were all raised, entire populations ultimately suffer. And this is well backed by data, so I'm going to look at it. In communities where women do not get to choose their partners freely, there are higher rates of abuse, trauma, and mental illness, lower emotional intelligence in children, and societies that are built on dominance, not connection, which ultimately falter and fail. And if you want me to do a video specifically talking about more of those stats and studies, let me know in the comments.
Most people assume that patriarchy, male dominance and hierarchy in society has always existed. But the truth is, patriarchy isn't natural. It's historical, and it was socially constructed over thousands of years. Archaeology, anthropology, and historical written record all confirm this. So the whole "it's always been this way" narrative simply isn't true. Early human societies, before cities, before empires, before organized religion, were largely cooperative. Yes, there were gendered roles, but they weren't hierarchical. They were equally valued and, again, cooperative. And new research has showed that even those roles are more flexible than we thought they were. Recent archaeological studies suggest that women also hunted, also made tools, and also were a part of community decision making. So the idea that women were only gatherers, that's been debunked. It wasn't until the agricultural revolution about 10,000 years ago that things began to shift. When people settled and began farming, land became a resource to protect and to pass down. And this is where patriarchy begins to take root. Because in order to pass land down through family lines, men needed certainty over their paternity. So this led to increased control over women's sexuality, women's mobility, and women's reproductive lives. Marriage became less about love and more about property, so women were married off, traded, and confined, and they were no longer partners in survival. They were property, and this is actually the first-class system. Then came written law, like the Code of Hammurabi, which codified male authority. So men were given legal power, women were punished more severely, and patriarchy became institutionalized. As societies grew, so did war, and men began to gain, political status through conquest. And while they returned home from battle with this new power, women stayed behind and they were stuck in domestic roles that were extremely essential but undervalued. Some researchers actually believe that these earlier stages of agricultural life, where men went to war and women stayed home and, raised children and tended the land, was a mutually adaptive agreement. But then as time went on, something changed. Other more patriarchal tribes or empires that centralized power through violence and hierarchy began to conquer neighboring communities. And this dominant model began to spread, not because it was better, but because they had the force to erase others. Even spirituality changed. For thousands of years, many cultures honored goddess tradition, where women were seen as symbols of divinity and fertility and wisdom and life. As patriarchal societies rose, stories of the divine gradually centered on male figures, and stories were told through a masculine lens. Not to discount personal faith today, I think this just shows how cultural power dynamics over time can shape religious narratives. So no, patriarchy isn't natural. It was socially constructed through land ownership, through law, through violence, and story. And once you see and understand this, you can't unsee it. And you also realize that it can be challenged because it wasn't born with us. It was built. And that means it can be unbuilt and rebuilt.
Not natural for women to submit because the creator never submits to its creation. That's not how nature works. That's not how intelligence works or how life organizes itself. There is nowhere in the animal kingdom where you see a patriarchal system as default. You'll see cooperation or role differentiation, although there are some species where you do see matriarchal leadership, but there's never a patriarchal leadership. That's not natural. What happened in history was a heist. Once humans got private property, developed agriculture, and developed inheritance systems, control over women became strategic. This is where the heist began. So because women are the ones that produce the heirs, biologically, women are the only ones that ever know with certainty if that child is theirs. So logically, inheritance and property ownership should have followed the woman's lineage. Last names should be the woman's last name. But instead, men used physical force, fear, and law to dominate women. So submission was never natural, it was enforced. Women were kept at home, uneducated, told to remain pure, kept economically dependent, and kept isolated so they wouldn't hear and know that what's happening is wrong. This was never about God or order or nature. This was always about control. And once you see that clearly, submission stops looking virtuous and starts looking exactly like what it is, a power grab. So don't fall for that shit, ladies.
Maybe marriage isn't working because we've forgotten that the origin of marriage saw women legally as property. A human being was seen as an economic contract. Once society shifted to owning land, everything became about making sure things were transferable and inheritable. Before this, the concept of owning land did not exist, as people could not fathom owning Mother Nature. This is the moment where a woman's body became regulated. You need to make sure that the sons she births are the bloodline of the father so he can pass his inheritance on to them. So a woman's body, her labor, her fertility all become central assets. Under English common law, a married woman has no separate legal existence. A husband and wife were considered one person, and that person was the husband. She could not own property, sign contracts, or control wages. This doctrine traveled around the world. Taking a husband's last name communicated that a woman was now under a husband's authority, and that any children belonged to his lineage, and property flowed through his name. This institution was not built on equality. Equality is now being forced into it. Modern marriage is now trying to retrofit intimacy and romance and autonomy into a system that was never designed for it. And maybe this explains all the tension we are seeing.
You all know the three rings of patriarchy, but let me say it. The first is what Carol calls the binary. Olga Silverstein called it the halving process. You take a whole human being, draw a line down the middle. Everything to the right is called masculine. Everything to the left is called feminine. Everybody knows the drill, right? The second I call the dance of contempt, which means that all of the quote unquote masculine qualities are exalted. All the quote unquote feminine qualities are devalued. The essential relationship between masculine and feminine is contempt. Third, I call the core collusion, which is whoever is on the quote unquote feminine side of the equation has a deep, almost visceral compulsion to protect who's ever on the masculine side of the equation, even while being hurt by them. You do not tell the truth to power. You do not lean in to the perpetrator or oppressor and unmask them. In fact, you regulate them.